good?
Yeah, looks like we're good to go.
We're good to go? Okay. All right. I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is a Finance Committee meeting of the School District of New Berlin. This is a public meeting of the Board of Education. Prior to this meeting, notice was given to the public last Friday by forwarding to the City Library for posting. The agenda was also posted on the district website. Copies of the agenda were forwarded to the Waukesha Freeman, the Waukesha Now, and the Journal Sentinel, all of which have filed requests for public notices. All right, the first order of business is to review, discuss, and approve, if applicable, the minutes from our May 26th meeting. Has everybody had a chance to review those minutes?
Yes, I have.
I move to approve the meeting minutes from May 26th meeting.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, and there's a second? It's been moved and seconded that we approve the meeting minutes from May 26th. All in favor? Do we need to call the roll, Diana?
Can we just do a disdain if anyone against it?
Oh, let's do. I'll just say I will ask for ayes and I'll ask for nays, and if there are no nays, we don't need a roll call. How about that?
That works.
All right. All in favor? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries unanimously. All right. Were there any remaining questions from the March and April financial reports?
I got a quick question just in general on the balance sheet. I look through these every once in a while, and I kind of question why we even have these balance sheets. I mean, I get it for a publicly traded company. It generally moves month to month, and it tells you a little bit about their business. But for a school district, I just feel like the swings are so erratic, and there's just not a lot of granularity in here. I just don't know that there's a big benefit to this. So I don't want to make Patrick go through the rigmarole of putting this stuff out there if we don't find a value to some of this stuff.
Okay.
But I don't want to speak forever.
Yeah, that's a good question, Mitch. So Patrick, what's your feel on that?
So I will tell you that this is the first district that I've worked for where I produced a monthly balance sheet. That being said, we have this report generated in Skyward. And so as far as producing it every month, we just simply have to run the report, and then I include it in the packet. But if the report really isn't serving a purpose, we can eliminate it. I don't have any problem with that.
Okay. Amy, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it is something I think we were seeing before, which is why we are seeing it now. But like Mitch said, it does fluctuate so much month to month. I think the check register and then now year-to-date reports that we see for May are probably of more value.
Okay. And I don't have any problem with that either, Pat. So if Pat, if you want to eliminate that, Pat, from the repertoire, I'm okay with that.
Not a problem. I'll still continue to monitor it. For the most part, I monitor it to make sure that if there are funds that are out of balance, then I work with my comptroller to figure out why and fix that. So
Sure.
I mean, it's a good internal document, but if it's not serving you guys any purpose, we can just eliminate it.
Okay. And thanks, Mitch, for bringing that up. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Okay. Any other issues on the March and April questions that are remaining? Hearing none, let's move on to the May financial reports. So I was able to send an email to Pat yesterday, and he responded like a champ before noon today. I really appreciate that quick turnaround, Pat. So I did have just a couple follow-ups from the email that I sent you. Amy and Mitch, I don't know if you saw my email that I sent last night, but it was an email that I sent to you, the both of you, and to Joe, so that I could ask Patrick these questions. So one thing I'm not really clear on is the payments to the University of Wisconsin Green Bay. I'm sure you can explain that better to me. I just didn't understand your answer.
Nope. So what happens is students pay for this coursework in their student fees, and we pay UW Green Bay. And so I consider it kind of a pass-through payment. We collect the fees, and then we pay the institution.
Okay, so both of those payments from both the initial, the May 1st run and the May 21st, I think it was, both of those payments are just pass-through payments. They're not like payments that we pay for tuition for any kids.
Yes.
Okay, and what are they? I mean, are these like current high school students that are taking college level courses, or where is this generated from?
Correct. I would have to find out specifically from like Kelly Kwiatkowski.
Okay. I was just surprised because I don't remember seeing that before. So that helps me to understand. But it's good to know that they're just pass-through payments and they're not things that we're putting the bill on.
Sure. And you may not see, you may only see these at this time of the year.
Okay.
This is specifically for our engineering coursework. So the students that take Project Lead the Way classes are eligible. Certain Project Lead the Way classes are eligible for UW Green Bay credit. But it does go through parents would pay the school district that would pass it through to Green Bay then.
Okay.
Is there a way that we could bypass that and have the parents pay directly to the school to eliminate you guys from having to kind of double handle the money there?
I think that would actually end up creating more consternation.
That's what I was wondering. Sometimes some of these things, it takes a little bit upfront work to set it up, but once you set it up, it's all passed through and it's a lot easier to manage. But I just trying to find ways to take workload off your guys' plate.
Yeah, because this is only billed, this is billed so infrequently, and because the student portion of it is on their student fees, it's really not a big deal. So.
Okay. I know that we've got the same thing with WCTC, probably Carroll. I mean, we see these through a few different universities, so I didn't know if there was a way to have the parents pay directly to that school.
Yeah, I think we've squeezed all the efficiencies out of this one that we can, but we'll definitely keep it in mind.
And okay, thank you. And then Patrick, on the Chameleon Communications, what were the virtual graduation expenses? Do we know?
I didn't actually pull that invoice to see specifically what was on it. I just know that those are for the virtual graduation expenses. I can try to find out more information and send that out to the committee if you would like.
Yeah, that would be great. I just didn't know that I just was kind of surprised that we had that many expenses. I mean, I believe it's accurate. I just was curious about why it was a significant amount of money when I didn't hear a lot about what actually went on. As far as a virtual graduation, we're still talking about possibly having like a summer graduation, which would be, you know what I mean?
I do know that there are typically graduation expenses every year, and they're about, my understanding is they're about the same.
Okay. So this wasn't, okay, yeah. But if you could get more detail from me for the committee, I'd really appreciate that on that one. And then, oh, sorry, was I cutting somebody off?
Nope.
Okay. All right. And then technology resource advisors, you said that 45,000 was for Chromebooks. Is that like a contract payment or replacement, or what was that for?
That's a replacement.
Okay. So we're replacing some devices that we're going to take out of service.
Correct.
Okay. And I assume that's on some kind of a schedule that we've got built into the budget, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then Wellwright, I'm sorry. Anybody else have any questions on that one? Okay, going on to the next one, Wellwright LLC for the wellness program expenses. I mean, we talked about this sort of a little bit at the last meeting. Do we have a way to track what the ROI is on the things like this wellness program. So we put money into this wellness program. How are we able to track in some fashion that this, $16,000 is a good investment and that's paying off in maybe proactive behavior on the part of employees? Or how do we, is that something that is in place already?
I certainly can talk with Nicole about tracking the ROI on wellness programs. I know that from my experience, tracking the performance of wellness programs is something that it's a behavioral modification that you see its impact over a longer period of time with the general health trends of the people that are on our plans. And so I think, unlike, like an electricity upgrade or a plumbing upgrade where it's easy to see an ROI almost immediately, this one is something that tends to take a little bit longer. But I certainly can follow up with Nicole and see if she has any other data or information that she can share with us.
That would be great, because I feel like it's something we should be tracking. And if it's long term and that's the best way to get data, then let's do it that way. But I just want to make sure that we're not doing these things because they were recommended to us and then they turn out not to be a great investment of our dollars.
Right. And understand that this is a wellness program that goes across all 500 plus of our employees. So when you look at a single $16,000 expense, that seems relatively high. When you look at the expense extrapolated over 550 employees, the cost goes down significantly.
Sure. On that, Patrick, what exactly is this? Is this more like the technology that we're using to implement this? Or is this like the screening cost to get this done? Or are this like rewards for people completing the wellness?
It's not for rewards. It's for all of the screening, for again, like you said, the technical aspect of, how people report, how people are tracking their different wellness activities and whatnot. So
okay, so this is, they have to do 2 or 3 things and then they get the bonus from the district to save X amount on their insurance or whatever.
Correct. This is not a bonus program. This is just the tracking program. Helps us manage our wellness. Understand, up until this last year, we did have a wellness coordinator, and so rather than paying a full salary for a person, now we have a technology piece that helps us try to bridge that gap between having a wellness coordinator and not having a wellness program at all.
Okay, and do you think this fee will be the same every year, or is this just a one-time fee, or do you think it's going to be relatively close?
I think this is an annual membership type of a deal, or annual.
I mean, like you said, it comes to $30 a piece, so I don't know if tracking an ROI and this is really going to be possible.
So, Patrick, if I understand you correctly, so my next question was going to be, are we going to see other payments we have to make to Wellwright LLC? But you're saying this is just a once a year item.
Yeah, according to the payment, it's an annual wellness program expense.
Oh,
it's an
okay.
Annual membership.
All right. And then to Mitch's question about whether it's worth tracking the ROI, I think that we probably should be keeping some kind of data on, what the overall trends are of the wellness of our employees based on our initiatives. So I don't know if it just goes to this Wellwright LLC piece, but I do think that overall, if we're going to have a wellness program, and for a while we had a wellness coordinator, I remember when we had that person, and then we decided to cut that because of budget issues. It's probably worthwhile to look into whether what we're doing now is better or worse than what we used to be doing and what we should do in the future.
These are things that we constantly review, and that's part of our overall health and medical insurance reviews with Hub, our consultant. So that's certainly already been taken care of. And based off of the data is when we bring suggestions to the board, similar to what we had just brought to the board and you will continue to do so. The data is driving our decisions and that of our recommendations to the full board, and reviewed by the Personnel Committee.
I was just going to say, what I would add to that is the discussion of the ROI on this one is probably more of a Personnel Committee issue.
Okay, sure. That's fine. I just want to, from the finance perspective, when we spend dollars, I feel like it implicates the finance committee.
Understand.
So, and then I'm looking, the next item I was looking at was the Cradwell School, which I'm familiar with seeing the Richardson School. Can you tell me, Patrick, how many placements do we have of special ed students outside of the district, and how many different places are they in? I was not aware that we had one at Cradwell School.
Yeah, I would have to defer that question to Amanda.
Okay.
We did present some of this to the board when we were talking about open enrollment. So Diana, I don't know if you can pull that up and refer to that, Crislin,
Okay.
as that had been provided previously.
Okay, I appreciate it, Joe. And I'm sorry to ask you to do it again. I just don't have it all committed to memory.
And Crislin, understand too that this is something that's very fluid.
Sure.
Where you can get, a quarter of the way into the school year, half a year in, or 3/4 of the year in,
Yep.
and have to transfer a student to an alternative placement. And so
Sure.
you can go, half a year without seeing Cradwell, and all of a sudden it pops up.
Sure.
And that's because of the fluid nature of working with students with special needs.
Sure. No, and I understand that. And then just out of curiosity, as far as the Cradwell School payment, that's a $19,000 payment. What time period is that for, Pat? Do you know?
I would have to dig deeper into that with Amanda to find out how long that's for.
Okay.
Now, understand, I've seen payments to Cradwell for a single student for $40,000 in previous districts.
Yep.
So, I'd have to defer to Amanda on the details.
Sure. And my understanding of some of these alternative placements is that the cost is exorbitant. And I believe from prior recitation of these amounts that it can be like $100,000 a year for a kid if that's what the kid has to have. So I know it's a very expensive placement, but we have to do what's in the best interest of these kids, and that's our unfunded, statutory mandate. So I get that, but I was just curious about how much time that covered. So Pat, do you want me to email Amanda, or do you want to email Amanda about those things?
If the information's coming back to the finance committee, I'll do the email. I'll send the email and return that back to all the members of the committee.
Great. I would appreciate that. Thank you so much. And then what I probably should know the answer to this. You said that the school district of Waukesha was paid $4,000 or so for the eAchieve student payment. What can you remind me what eAchieve is?
eAchieve is tuition for a distance, or I should say, a virtual school. So we have a student. We're paying the tuition for a student to attend eAchieve. We get to count that student as a student for revenue limit purposes, but we're paying the tuition for that student.
So that's just for one student?
Most likely, eAchieve is based off of the open enrollment amount, which is a little over $8,000.
Yeah. So I'm not familiar with that. Amy, are you familiar with that?
I am, but only because I know like people that have used this in the past. So it's another placement for students that have some needs outside of what the district can offer. That's another placement school for them.
Huh. I have never heard of that. Okay. Those are all my questions. Amy and Mitch, did you guys have any additional questions based on your review of the reports?
No, I think I covered it.
I did have one, and I think it was in April. There was a check for, and sorry, Patrick, this is not on the list, but there was a check for $1,083 to James Ernst Benfield. and that's the ex-superintendent within New Berlin. I was curious if we knew what that was. If you don't, I apologize for. If you want to write that down and try to get back to me.
What I'd have to look specifically into it. But my guess is that it's a retirement reimbursement for like medical.
Okay, so we pay that out of the district?
Yes. For some of the administrative retirements or employee retirements that we've had in the past, there are some reimbursements that are paid by the district. Former employees required to provide the documentation, and then we reimburse them.
Okay, that sounds good. That would go through our insurance.
Okay, so can we move on to an update on Skyward if you have one, Patrick?
The only thing that I would say is, as far as my update on Skyward goes back to the financial reports. And so when you look at the 2 additional reports that I've included this month, and that's the budget by object, which is expenses, and budget by source, which is our revenues. This is a report that we've developed in Skyward, and we are continuing to work with Skyward because one of the things that we noticed, and I included these 2 reports, even though there is there's an error on the report in that last year's it's showing you the current year to date, but in the previous years it's showing the total expense for the entire year. But I did want to give you an idea of what these reports look like. Because I think they're very understandable reports. They drill deep enough that you can get an idea of where our funds are coming from and where our funds are going, but they don't drill so deep that you just get bogged down in all the minutia. But I did, we are, and I had a conversation with Crystal Reed today. We are continuing to work with Skyward to fix that little hitch in the previous year so that it's showing us the month to date. So for example, when I run this in May, it's going to show last year up to May instead of last year for the total year.
That's fantastic.
And I did want to get the committee's impression on these 2 reports. Do you, to see if you like the look of these reports? Do you feel like it's giving you data that is useful as far as a report goes?
Helpful. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mitch.
I think it's helpful, and I think the problem with it, like everything else, is now we need an explanation of what every line item entails. Because there's just so many line items on here that can be understood by me as one thing and by another person as something else, like transfers or dues and fees. Like, what exactly is entirely included in that? So I don't know if we want to bog down this report with that entire secret decoder ring for what each of these line items are, but I think we probably need something like that of what everything fits into that bucket.
And so what I can do, if again, the difficult thing is striking that balance between, rolling everything up into just a single digit object or source, and people wanting, well, this isn't enough detail, and then giving them a little bit more detail and having them go, well, now we've got so much detail we don't understand it. So what I might be able to do is put some explanation, put together kind of a secret decoder page that will tell you what each of those descriptions is in, just a short, sentence or 2. And that way,
a sentence or 2, and then 2 or 3 examples maybe or whatever would probably cover it. Yeah, we don't want a paragraph or a page for each of them, but and I don't think that's a huge rush on that. I think it's just something that as we build out our reporting and our visibility to the public, I think, on some of this stuff. It's just one of those things that we're definitely going to need to add over time. But it can grow. I mean, it's not something that has to happen overnight.
Sure. And, one of the things that I certainly agree is, for example, when you look at travel, it's easy to look at that and say, oh my gosh, we spend $2 million on travel, which most people say, equate that to employee travel. But travel in the Department of Public Instruction world includes all of the pupil transportation, all of the transportation for co-curriculars, even the transportation for like field trips and whatnot. We bring revenue in, but we pay it out of this travel.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the reasons why I like this report is if we do have anybody that decides to go to DPI and look at, like our annual reports or our budget reports or anything like this, this is the terminology that they're going to see. And so I like to try to keep things consistent, but I'm more than willing to put together kind of a little tutorial so that it makes sense to you. That's my goal. Provide you with information to make sure that it makes sense.
That would be great, Pat. I'd really appreciate that. And this is, to give you a little feedback, this is very much like the kind of report that I was hoping to see with, the fixing of the glitch about where we are in the percentage year instead of having to include the whole year in the previous year. If you can, fixing that glitch is going to help us be able to compare where are we in terms of percentage spent or received for the present year. So that's going to be very helpful. But that's exactly what I was looking for, because that's where I feel like we can see flags of what we should see or what we should be concerned about.
Right.
So I really appreciate that. So Amy, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, just echoing that I like the budget by object one a lot, because I think we can see really quickly where we're trending in the right direction, and comparing it to the previous year is very helpful in that time frame as well. So I do like this report. I think this is exactly what we've been looking for.
Great. And I agree with Mitch. I mean, if you can just do maybe at the next meeting, Pat, if you could do sort of a brief kind of rundown with us about these line items. Don't kill yourself over the time, but just so you can kind of explain to us going through each line item, what that line item is, and just to, if a few words suffice, that's fine with me. I just want to have an understanding of what all of them mean, because some of them I don't get. So that would be really great if you could plan on that for the next time.
I certainly can.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay. So anything else on the Skyward conversion?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. Amy, Mitch?
I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to the policies 6610 and 3440 to review those. Now, we talked about at the last meeting some changes, some additions to these two policies so that we could implement them in our new kind of policy overhaul that we've been undertaking the last few months. So I proposed a policy for each one of these. I got the original text from Diana, and I just made the revisions that I took notes on in the last meeting. So let's start out with 6610, if you don't mind. That's the Student Activity Fund. And this, what I tried to do was I took the beginning language, that's the Neola language that Diana had sent to me, and then I just highlighted and struck out any changes or highlighted additions so that you guys could see what was changed from the previous version to keep it simple. So any thoughts on 6610 from Amy or Mitch?
No, I think that captures what we discussed last week, our last meeting on this one, specifically around the senior class being able to transfer that fund to like reunions and other events in the future. I like that addition to that as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Amy. And Mitch, what about you?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Okay. All right. So then if we're good with that proposal, then can I have a motion to move this to the full board for consideration?
Motion to move Neola policy 6610 and 3440 to the board for full board approval.
Mitch, I think you meant 6610, right?
6610 and 3440.
Okay, but we didn't talk about 3440 yet.
Sorry, 6610 only.
Okay. Is there a second? Okay, thanks, Amy. All right. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. So then Diana, could you take that proposed draft and put it in the proper format for submission to the board at the July meeting? Is that okay with you, Amy, if we do that?
Yeah.
Okay, because I know you're in charge of the agenda, so I don't want to step on your toes with that, but that's where I'd like to, take it up for consideration by the full board. Okay.
Got it.
Thank you so much, Diana. And then moving on to policy 3440. So this one also, I tried to highlight any additions that were made. I didn't strike anything out of this one, but I do have a couple blanks because I know that in our previous conversation, Mitch, you had mentioned that you wanted to limit some of the per diems for employees. And I know that we talked about this last time, Patrick, so I don't know where we landed on that. So I left them blank for discussion. So Pat, why don't you speak to that? Could you do that?
Sure. The one thing, this is the only part of this particular policy that I am a little bit concerned with, because when you put numbers like this into a policy, then you're setting yourself up to have to go through and redo this policy every year. If there are changes in per diem or, adjustments for, cost of living or inflation or whatever you rather call it. Typically,
Sure.
what I would see in this type of a paragraph is that something to the effect of employees shall be employee reimbursement limits will be set in like a district travel policy or a district
Yeah,
travel.
you guys already have that for this. It's this whole spreadsheet that has you can spend X amount of money on a hotel room in Green Bay versus Davenport, Iowa. Yeah, so I agree. I think we should. I like the addition of the 100-mile piece, but I think we should pull this on food and breakfast and all that.
So that's fine. And I totally appreciate the fact that, otherwise we're revisiting this policy on a regular basis, trying to adjust our numbers. So Patrick, that spreadsheet that we talked about, we had that spreadsheet at our last meeting. We all looked at it, and there is a pretty significant, criteria set up for reimbursement. So what is that called, and how is that woven into the employee handbook, and how do we bind our employees to that schedule?
This is on the employee intranet.
Okay.
And this is the document whenever an employee is traveling in the district, or for the district or for district business. This is the spreadsheet that they are given or forwarded by their school administrator or administrative assistant. This is the document that kind of guides your travel. And for example, if I'm sending anybody from my office, this is what, I tell them this is what I use, to help guide their travel. And so it's up to us, administratively, we do this internally. It's not something that we just expect employees to know when they come to work for the district.
Okay, so if I had some language in there instead of what I've got, that last highlighted paragraph in the middle of the page,
Mhm.
if I had some language in there, something like, employees shall be limited for reimbursement to the schedule set on, what are we calling it?
It would be the travel policy procedures.
Okay, district travel policy procedures. Okay, all right. Limited for reimbursement to, there we go. And then it wouldn't just apply. I mean, the language I had here was breakfast and lunch and dinner, and that wouldn't limit that. That would be other reimbursements as well.
Correct. There's guidance for everything in there.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to make that change, and then I'm going to circulate that to the committee, get everybody to sign off on that. And then Diana, if you could do the same thing, well, provided that it passes with this change, with the policy 3440. Does that sound good, guys?
Yep.
Okay, Amy and Mitch, does that sound all right?
Yes, that sounds good.
Okay, Mitch. Okay, so with that addition, with that change in that paragraph in the middle, I'm sorry, in the middle of the page, is there a motion as amended to forward this proposal on to the full board for consideration?
With proposed changes, I propose to move the Neil 3440 policy full board approval at the next meeting.
All right. Is there a second? Thank you, Amy. All right. It's been moved and seconded that we forward policy, Neola policy 3440 as amended to the full board for consideration. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. And I will, as I indicated, make that change, circulate it to the committee, and then forward it to Diana for final presentation to the board. All right. Very good. So I am looking at now, as far as the other policies that we need to manage. I believe that I know that everybody had a list of policies that we wanted to review. And I believe that we do have a few remaining on this list. So I think that we probably should take on, I'd like your input on this, but probably a couple more policies for the next meeting to consider. And I'd like those policies to be 3250, which is investment of district funds, and 3450 as well, monies in school buildings. Any other thoughts on those two? Are you guys okay with just moving forward with those two for the next meeting?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. That'll be good.
Okay.
Can we have Diana pull any Neola policies through and have those sent to us before the meeting?
Absolutely. I think it's a great idea. Diana, would you be able to do that for those two policies?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I did reference them in the notes here, but yep, I will do that.
Wonderful.
Looks like there's only one.
That would be great. So then if you could upload in board docs, the Neola policy for each of the companion Neola policy for each of those, and then our current policies for 3250 and 3450. And then we'll take those two up at the next meeting. Okay. And then the last item on our agenda is our committee goals. So I took notes at the last meeting, and I think that we were a little rushed. So they weren't amazing notes, I will say that. But what I wanted to throw these at you guys and make sure that I captured each of your thoughts. I think that primarily one of my primary goals was to simply increase transparency for the district, for the community, actually, as far as our finances and that type of thing. So that was one of my primary objectives. I believe, Amy, you and I agreed that we should continue monthly reviews of the financial statements and have that be a regular, something that we accomplish at every meeting. And you also agreed with me that we should continue to update our financial policies throughout the term of the year. And then Mitch, I really did not take a good note when you said that you wanted a more detailed, I had in my notes, concise annual budget and then more detailed. And so that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. Do you remember what you were talking about with that?
For goals,
Yes, goals for the committee for this year.
Yeah, and I've used the example of Brookfield's report, Ellen. It just goes into more detail and then lays out exactly what's in each of those funds, and it goes into what our goals are for the year. It's a more robust.
And I think that, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
And Patrick and I have talked on that one-on-one. So I think him and I are pretty aligned on what that looks like. I guess I probably need to get us aligned on it, but I think for starters, our budget's like 8 pages and theirs is like 30. It just goes into more detail. And my expectation, obviously, the same as what I said before, is it's not to get there in 6 months. It's kind of probably a 2 or 3 year goal to get there over time. But going into more detail, like right now, we just show what are our electrical costs across the entire district. I'd like to have it kind of broken out. Do we break it up by school buildings so that we know how we're looking at some of that and how we manage from year to year and what improvements change, so that we get better granularity into that, as well as the public. What I want to do is get to a level of detail that Patrick doesn't have to answer a bunch of questions from the public. He can give them this 30-page document or whatever it is, and it's a lot more self-explanatory. But right now, when I look at our budget, I've got 100 questions.
Okay. And then I guess my question about that, though, Mitch, is the finance committee doesn't prepare the budget. Patrick does. So what's our role, I guess, is what I'm not clear on in your suggestion.
I think that's something that obviously Patrick prepares it, but we can certainly have input in what that looks like. I think that this is the area that we should be telling Patrick, this is what, giving him feedback, this is what we like of the budget and this is what we don't like of how the budget's prepared, and working with him, as opposed to the entire board taking that on in a 7-person committee versus a 3.
Okay. So Pat, what are your thoughts on that?
I actually think it's a great idea that I'm going to start to get some feedback on how you would like it. You're not actually telling me what to put in the budget. You're just telling me how you would like to see the budget, or some suggestions on how you'd like to see the budget presented to allow you greater understanding and to provide greater transparency for the community.
Great. Okay. So then how about this for a proposal? Because what I want to do is I want to boil these goals down so that we can include them on the finance committee part of the district website, so that people know what our goals are, and we can hopefully be continually kind of reminded of what we're trying to do. I think that we need to do all of those things as far as finishing updating our policies, and we're going to finish that review. That we're going to get through all the policies. I don't think it's going to take us that long. So I think that, Mitch, would you be okay with working through the policies and then taking on the budget format, or would you like to do it concurrently?
I almost think otherwise we're not going to get it in line for this year. I don't think we're going to be able to, if we wait a month or two, I don't think we'll be able to.
Okay, so then I think we have to, what's that? I'm sorry, go ahead.
1 or 2 areas that we want to focus on to improve for this year, and we don't swallow the whole elephant in one bite.
Right.
So we try to pick up a few things that we think we can make an impact on, or Patrick kind of gives us feedback where he thinks it needs the most work, or where he feels like he needs the most input. We can work on that area.
Okay, so then maybe I think we got to do something like we did, like we've been doing with policies, which is, I kind of made a list of all the policies and we parsed them out to, different committee members, right? So that, I took on these 5 policies, you took on these next 5, et cetera, and so on. So so I'm looking at the preliminary budget now for the 2021 school year. And I think that we could all, kind of take our portion of that. Is that something that you think that we should try to work on starting at the next meeting, or do you want to push that over to August?
I think we can look at that a lot.
Okay.
I guess
All right.
let's take a second and have Patrick say have Patrick let us know what he's working on or what he thinks he needs to clean up the most, and take some input from there and let him kind of, because I don't want to force Patrick into a square hole if all he has is a round peg. And I'd rather get some input on him of what he's already working on and where he thinks we need to see some of those changes. And then if we think that some of those are the top and we want to add one or two other ones, then we can look at that.
Okay. So, Mitch, how do you see that? What logistically, how do you see that working in the July meeting then? What do you want us to do?
Well, let's just have, Patrick, does that work for you? Do you want to come back next in the July meeting and just let us know the areas that you think you're working, or areas that you're working on, areas that you think need improvement, and then what your kind of plans, proposals are for that, and then we can discuss that in the July meeting, or we could just exchange a few emails over that time too and give him a little bit more direction so that he's better prepared for the July meeting. Does that work for you, Patrick?
Yeah, I think what I can bring to the July meeting are some of the things that I'm hoping to add to the budget presentation, and kind of go through what the order in which I think it will be good for the district to implement those. Obviously, some of them are going to be a little more difficult to implement than others, and so let me just take a swing at that.
Okay. So then, if I understand it, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. In my opinion, I do think it's related to that first goal that you mentioned, which was about more transparency.
Sure.
And I think that could be a sub goal within that, that's specific to the budget presentation. So that again, in my opinion, they're sounding like they're in a similar sphere, but
Sure.
kind of within that context.
Sure. So let me put something together. And then again, I'll circulate it. I just want everybody to be in agreement with the language, like Joe's talking about, as far as, where, and Joe, of course, I'll include you on those emails. As far as what our goals are going to be moving forward. But for the next meeting in July, I believe what I understand is going to happen is Patrick is going to, at Mitch's suggestion, bring us his thoughts on the current format and areas of growth that he can identify for how the budget is presented. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
You're good with that, Pat? And Mitch, is that okay?
Yeah, that works for me.
Okay, sounds good. All right. So I think with that, I believe we are good. So then I'll like I said, I'll be forwarding what I believe the goals are that we've agreed on here, and then we can vote on that at the next meeting, so that we can include them on the website and publicize it to the community about what our goals are and what we're working on. Does that sound fair?
That sounds great.
Great. Thank you. All right. I don't have anything further. Does anybody else have anything further? Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to it.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. This meeting is adjourned. And then Diana, do we just stay on the same call for the open, or is this closed?
No, you'll stay on for a roll call, and then we'll go into the
Ladies and gentlemen, it is now 6:32 and a quorum of members is present, so the meeting of the Board of Education of the School District of New Berlin is called to order. Please call the roll.
Ms. Crosby,
Here.
Mr. Helmer,
Here.
Mr. Kurth,
Here.
Ms. Manley,
Here.
Ms. Schulz,
Here.
Ms. Unger,
Here.
Ms. Wondercheck.
Here.
I would entertain a motion to adjourn to closed session.
I move to adjourn into closed session pursuant to section 19.85. I don't have this in front of me. 1C, E, and F of Wisconsin statutes to discuss the following: the employment performance compensation matters pertaining to staff and negotiation strategies.
Mitch Helmer, second.
A motion by Mr. Kurth, a second by Mr. Helmer. Please call the roll.
Mr. Kurth,
Yes.
Mr. Helmer,
Yeah.
Ms. Crosby,
Yes.
Ms. Manley,
Yes.
Ms. Schulz,
Yes.
Ms. Unger,
Yes.
Ms. Wondercheck.
Yes.
We are moving into closed session and will return to open session around 7 p.m. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now 7:01 and we are returning from closed session into open session. In recognition of the serious and important nature of our efforts here, we will join in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now for those who wish to prepare for the meeting, we will have a moment of silence. This is a public meeting of the Board of Education. Prior to this meeting, notice was given to the public last Friday. They posted the agenda on the district website and forwarding to the city library. A copy of the agenda was forwarded to the Journal Sentinel, the Waukesha Freeman, and the Waukesha Now, all of which had filed requests for all public notices. The next item is privilege of the floor. Jana, did we receive any specific comments to be read today?
We did receive and will forward a petition to the board when the actual statement is received, and then possibly read that at the next meeting. This was a petition regarding the school start and end times.
All right, thank you. Yes, when there's a statement to be read, we'll read it at our next meeting, and then you can send it to the board. Thank you. The next item is the president's message. I do not have one at this time, which brings us to the superintendent's update.
Yeah, so I just wanted to provide one general update and then was going to defer to the items that we have in the regular agenda, specifically related to school district reentry come next fall. But I did want to circle back based on a comment that was read last week at Privilege of the Floor, and wanted to just reiterate Amy's statement on behalf of the school board and the school district that we certainly do not condone racism or discrimination of any kind. We share the sadness that many folks may be feeling as a result of recent happenings across our country. As proponents of continuous improvement efforts and in talks with myself and Amy, we will be pulling together district staff and have been doing so over the course of the last few weeks to review our current practices and how we address our students, staff, and families with diversity and inclusion topics. This review will allow us and our team to determine what gaps we may have in order to make necessary adjustments which may be needed. We did also clarify further that we certainly want our students to know that the staff and administration are here for them during the school year and over the summer, during tough times and when things are going well. We hope we hope to actually pull together an advisory committee sometime as we enter into next fall. As we've been doing some of this review, that advisory committee or some focus groups will include staff members, students, and families of all different backgrounds to kind of talk about some of the things that we have done, have been working on, and plan to do, so that they can kind of hear and provide us their respective feedback for us to consider as we move to implement any set adjustments moving forward. Again, given all the COVID stuff, it certainly delays our attempts to be able to do some things, but know that we are working behind the scenes and we will continue to do so and look forward to getting that feedback and making the adjustments needed. So again, just wanted to acknowledge the fact that we have received, again, not only that message of privilege of the floor at the last board meeting, but also in any emails that we've recently received related to these topics as well. So with that, that concludes my update, and we'll defer to the other items that are on the regular agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. The next item is the district reports. Are there any items that should be pulled out for separate consideration? Mr. Kurth, can you please read the donation report? If you're on mute, Jeff.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, for Eisenhower, Northwestern Mutual Foundation was the donor. Proposed funds for the support of the special needs program, they donated $250. For Elmwood, the Herb Cole Educational Foundation, in honor of Julie Ibar as a Cole Fellow, received $6,000. Congratulations to her. And for New Berlin West, the New Berlin Swim Community Group, for the purchase of competitor racing lanes for swim teams, it was $2,284.94. For the district office, Citizens Bank, Federal Home Loan Bank, in support of food service meals to local students was $2,500. New Berlin West are the following two, both from the Herb Cole Educational Foundation, to honor Donna Malone as a Cole Fellow. She received $6,000, and the honor to honor Jessica Santiago as a Cole Fellow as well for $6,000. Thank you very much for your donations, and congratulations to our Herb Cole Educational Foundation donors. Fantastic job, everyone. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot, and have a great night.
Thank you. That moves us on to our consent agenda. Are there any items that should be pulled out for separate consideration? Do I have a motion for the consent agenda?
Susan, so moved.
Second, Mitch.
A motion by Ms. Manley, a second by Mr. Helmer to approve the consent agenda. Any discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Ms. Manley?
Yes.
Mr. Helmer?
Yes.
Ms. Crosby?
Yes.
Mr. Kurth?
Yes.
Ms. Schulz?
Yes.
Ms. Unger?
Yes.
Ms. Wondercheck?
Yes.
Motion passes. That brings us on to our regular agenda, which the first item, item A, is presentation of budget forecast.
So we have been asked by the board to continue to work on a budget forecast. I know that we have throughout the year already brought several items of discussion related to assumptions that we make within the forecast to the board. And as a result of that, we've put that into consideration. This is the first high-level presentation that we want to give related to a 5-year budget at this time. I do want to clarify a couple things and know that because, and again, I'm going to mention this when we get into the COVID discussion later, much of what's happening in public education right now is very much in flux. Just like the state of our economy, just like the workforce, so on and so forth. School districts right now don't necessarily know what the impact COVID-19 will have on our funding. And Patrick will kind of get into that, but I do want to just clarify that this is a living, breathing document, and that not only is it a living, breathing document, it needs to be a document that we get your feedback on so that we make sure that this is the district 5-year forecast and not Patrick or the administration's 5-year forecast. So this will be our first glance at where we are. We would like to kind of get your feedback on it, but again, please know that a lot of the assumptions, typically as you go out further, the less accurate the assumption, the forecasting is. But even given the circumstances that we're dealing with COVID-19, certainly even makes possibly next year, the year after, even that much more difficult. So just wanted to provide that umbrella as Patrick heads into this presentation. Patrick?
Thanks, Joe. I'm going to just really briefly give you kind of a high level of what's kind of going on in the state of Wisconsin with regards to budget forecasting. As Joe said, this is even on a normal year, budget forecasting is a difficult process to go through, mainly because school districts are always aiming at a moving target. There are always opportunities where we can increase or decrease revenues throughout the year. And sometimes those changes come to us without much, if any, warning. Normally, the second year of a biennial state budget is an easier year to do budget forecasting. That's the year that we are going into right now. But because of the current situation with the economic impacts of COVID-19, it's making this second year of the biennial budget much more difficult to forecast. What I do on a very regular basis is meet with school business officials, CFOs throughout Waukesha County. Once a month, meeting with business officials in all of southeastern Wisconsin. We have regular communications with the Department of Public Instruction and the Wisconsin Association of School Business Officials to help all of us try to understand what's happening in the state legislature, what's happening in the federal government, and what's happening, essentially locally, to help us put together as accurate a forecast as we can. I also work with a company called Forecast 5 to help put this particular forecast together. This is a very sophisticated program that takes into account historical values, what's in the state budget, what is happening with enrollments, what's happening with revenue limits and whatnot. So this particular company that I work with, I believe gives us the best opportunity for forecasting as possible. The first slide that you see here, these are high-level assumptions that I use to put this particular forecast together. I'm not going to read all of those assumptions, but what I am going to do is tell you a little bit about how I came with these assumptions. At this point in time, there has been much discussion around the need for a budget repair bill in the state of Wisconsin. What we have learned is that it is unlikely that a budget repair bill is going to come before October when we set our levies. And so for the 2021 fiscal year, the only place that the state is going to be able to adjust support for education is in the area of categorical aid. And so we did not make any changes in this first year for revenue limits. We only made changes for categorical aid because that's the only place where we feel the state is going to be able to go. Going into 22-23, we had 0 increases in revenue limit. And that's based on some information that we received from the Wisconsin Economic Forecast in May, indicating that the anticipated financial recovery from COVID-19 is expected in the state of Wisconsin in late 2023. So in 24-25, we've added a modest increase in revenue limit to assume a gradual return to more financial support for K-12 education. You can also see what we did for categorical aid in 21, 22, and 23, and then again in 24 and 25 for the same reasons. I did include in this assumption a 3% increase in equalized value in the city of New Berlin. I did confer with my counterpart in the city to essentially ask if he thought it was realistic for me to use a 3% increase. He agreed that he felt that was a good place to start. On the expense side, you can see what I've included in this particular assumption for salary increases for the 5-year forecast. This is not to say that these are the increases that the district is expected to give, but for forecasting purposes, I put a 2.5% increase in salaries. I did include a 3% increase in health insurance, which is below what you would expect if you were a fully insured plan, but because of our self-insured status and looking at our recent past, I think a 3% increase is at least a good place for us to start. Other things that are included in here, the fund balance of a little over $1 million for the end of the 2020 fiscal year is an estimate, as most districts are anticipating that there will be some cost savings due to COVID-19. But what most districts are doing, or what all districts that I work with are doing, is we're using that fund balance to offset what we are anticipating for future reductions. What is also included in this is the increase in technology for the K-3 implementation. We also included the $250,000 fund balance additional spending for facilities. Another thing that we did include in this were general savings through either personnel or for reduced or eliminated services throughout the next fiscal year. You can go on to the next slide, please.
Patrick, can you clarify the assumptions made herein? Because I know with the decision being made regarding transportation at the last meeting, did you have time to include those changes in this forecast?
Correct. The transportation savings that we anticipate realizing with the changes that were approved at the last board meeting are included in this summary, as well as, for example, while we had an increase in spending in one area for the K-3 implementation, there is also some savings on other devices that we are not going to have to replace. So those are just a couple of examples of some of the additional savings that are baked into this particular forecast. This might be a good place for me to just pause and say the benefit of working with this particular format is every quarter I can evaluate where we are with the budget and where we believe we're going to be going based on the information from the state, federal government, and what we're doing locally. And so using this format for the forecasting is going to give me the ability to really continue to push this forecast forward. And then on an annual basis, we should always be ready to go with another 5-year forecast. The slide that we're on right now, these are just the general numbers that populate the graphical representation of our 5-year forecast. Again, these numbers are based on some of the formulas that drive state aid and how reductions in state aid impact the local tax base. This also includes some shifting of revenue, for example, rental of facilities. The district in the past has been recording that rental in Fund 80, and new directives from the Department of Public Instruction indicates that we should be reporting that revenue in Fund 10. And so, when you look at, for example, an increase in local revenue, not all of that is property taxes. Some of that also comes from rental revenues, for example. The numbers that you see here, and if you notice, there's a lot more changes that happen in fiscal 21. And then as you go into 22 and following years, you're going to see a lot of those changes. The changes are much smaller. And as Joe said, because as you start to travel out from your current fiscal year, it becomes more and more difficult to zero in on what the budgeting assumptions are going to be. And so, like I said in the first slide, I worked with local business managers and what they're using for assumptions, and from our representative with Forecast 5 as to what we believe is going to be a logical path for school funding. If you go on to the next slide, please.
Patrick, if I could actually just, I do want to point out that while the numbers are significant, if we are balancing budgets, even with the utilization of fund balance, we're still within the board's policy of not going below that 10% contingency until fiscal year 2025. And so I just want to kind of point that out, that again, got to look at it as a big picture, but then also at the same time, we don't want to knee-jerk react to something that's being forecasted out 5 years at this time. I do think we need to be diligent in our efforts, certainly, to continue to make adjustments to balance budgets. As for example, up until this year, we were not funding our long-range facilities plan. At this point, we now have $250,000 that we're able to do with. That may not be enough, but that's where we landed as the facilities committee's recommendation and where the board felt comfortable. So again, I just want to make sure that we're looking at this in its entirety and not just looking at that last year, assuming that the end is near here, but at the same time making sure that we're responsible with our actions to fiscally assure that we're able to balance our budgets in the near future. So go ahead, Patrick. Thank you.
Thank you. And the biggest thing that a forecast of this nature, some folks may say, well, if the numbers are going to vary so much or have the potential to vary so much, why would you even look at a 5-year forecast like this? And the answer is very simple. Looking at a forecast lets us understand what is likely to happen in the future, not so that we will put all of these changes in place, but that we will be able to, as an administrative team, have discussions so that we can have things ready to go depending upon what happens from a funding support structure. It's about readiness.
Yep.
It's not about being able to zero in on exactly what's going to happen.
Patrick, if I could also add, it also allows us to have a baseline of how, whether it's additional revenue or additional savings, plays an impact in future budgets. So for example, now that you have this, you can kind of take into context that transportation savings or the financial impact that the additional iPads would have, and you would know how, say we have another, say a $300,000 savings somewhere, you'll know how big of an impact that could have on your future budgets. And again, to provide that baseline and that high level context. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So as you can see, based on the graphic representation, we anticipate having a surplus this year, essentially from much of the shutdown from COVID-19. The next 2 years, we have anticipated modest budget deficits. If you look at those two budget deficits compared to what we anticipate for a surplus this year, we should be very comfortably able to manage fiscal 21 and fiscal 22. And then if you look at fiscal 23, and remember, in fiscal 22 and fiscal 23 is where we anticipate that there could be a greater reduction in state aids, whether it's equalization aid or categorical aid, in order to manage the economic downturn due to COVID-19 in the state. Now, what's going to be important is that economic impact is also just as much in flux right now as our budgets are in flux. And so as that economic picture becomes clearer to us, I will be able to go into this forecast and make changes and see how those changes are going to impact our future. You also then see so surplus deficit on one column, and then in the other chart, you see what we anticipate for the ending fund balances. If you can go on to the next slide, please. The last three slides in this particular presentation are a forecast of what we anticipate will happen with the tax levy and the mill rate. Again, in this first 5-year forecast of the mill tax and levy, I'm not going to go through all of those numbers, but some of the key things that you can see in there is, as we have state aids reducing, that would also result in an increase in property tax levy for general education. But if you'll also notice that the increases that we anticipate in the actual levy, those are balanced, I guess, by what we anticipate as equalized property value. And you can see we forecasted property values increasing at 3% each year. If you look at historically, 3% property values have increased on a 5-year average of about just a little over 4%. The last couple of years, 4.67, 4.13, 5.44 have been healthy increases in equalized value, which offsets, keeps the mill rate continuing to drop. If you go on to the next slide, and this is more for the visual folks out there like I am, you can see the mill rate analysis and how that mill rate, even though our anticipated state support over the next 5 years is going to go down, our property values are going to exceed what that potential increase could be. And the final slide, before we have any questions, just to give, if you go on to the next slide, just to give you an example of how that projected mill rate will impact different property values, I've included a school portion of the property tax levy calculation that will show the value of homes from 100,000 to 350,000 and what we project the school portion of the property tax levy to be. So again, just another comparison that you can use in how we anticipate or how we forecast the next 5 years are going to play out. That concludes all of the slides that I have for this first draft of our budget forecast. Joe, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts to add. Otherwise, I'd welcome any questions, and I'll take notes for what we plan on doing the next time we come around and take a look at this at the 5-year forecast.
I did just want to clarify one piece on that previous slide related to the school portion of property tax levy. With the assumptions being made, it is a downward trend, and it's like it has been for the last 5 years. It will continue to trend downward, maybe not as steeply as we've experienced recently, but it will continue to decline and taxes will go down in our current projection model.
And Joe, can I add to that? I think there's a common misunderstanding that we're not levying to the max. I think we touch on this every year that the school district is levying to the max. We are taking the most we can in taxes for this. It's just the fact that, for example, this year we had a large boom in building, and so there's a lot more tax money that's coming out of households, and we don't necessarily have an increase in kids. So an increase in kids that we're educating. So our expenses aren't going up at the rate that we're bringing in new tax revenue. So that's a big reason for that mill rate dropping, correct? Can you clarify that?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
That is correct. That we are maximizing the levy, or at least we have been, unless we're told otherwise. We are assuming that we are maximizing the levy moving forward. And yes, I would agree with what you just mentioned as well. So thanks for that clarification.
I think, Mitch, what might be a good way to kind of explain that is we, in revenue limits, we are not, the revenue limit for school districts is a dollar amount that's set by the state revenue limit formula. It's not necessarily a tax rate. So what's happening in many municipalities in New Berlin is a very good example of that is property tax values are rising faster than the actual dollar amount that we're allowed to levy.
Correct. Yeah. And that number fluctuates based on how many children we have for full-time enrollment, correct?
Yes. It fluctuates based on enrollment and also based on what we receive for state equalization aid.
Okay, excellent. Thanks. And then we touched on earlier about the transportation being factored in here. Is that transportation factored in all 4 years for the savings, or is that just in year 21?
Yes, and just to give you a little bit of information, kind of how this program works, is I can put changes in the budget in 2 different ways. I can put a change in that is 1 year, or I can put a change in that's recurring. And what happens if I put a recurring change in is in future years, as I put percentages of increases, it will take into account, what those recurring changes are, as well as any one-time changes. So, yep, that is baked in for the 5 years of the forecast.
Okay, so looking at this, I mean, we have deficits with this change. So if we didn't have that extra 400 and some thousand, we'd be looking at, in year 2025, we'd be looking at a fund balance of close to probably $3 million.
Most likely, yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much for the clarification.
Any other questions?
Just a quick question. So this is helpful, right? I know the further out it's less accurate, right? Just given all the variables. But is the intent to revisit this on a quarterly basis? I'm not really sure where we go with this or how we use this.
That's a good question, Susan. I will use it personally on a quarterly basis, or I should say whenever I get information that gives me greater confidence in what's going to happen in the future. I will plug those numbers directly into our forecast. So it becomes a living, breathing document more for me as a regular forecasting exercise. But then what I would say is whenever we have significant changes, it would be good for me to, through the executive leadership team and Joe, to potentially put this back on the board agenda so that we can look at those updates.
Susan, I guess what we would propose as we look to prepare future board agendas is certainly we will keep the board abreast with any and all changes with this COVID-19 piece. Again, as Patrick mentioned, a lot of this may not change until we know of a budget repair bill. And again, right now, we're not assuming it's going to impact us by October. Certainly it could. But I guess my thoughts would be is if we could have a mid-year chat about this, similar presentation with, any adjustments that Patrick has made, kind of get, answer any questions and or make any adjustments necessary. So we do it at least 2 times a year. So this being the first time, and then I'm thinking maybe sometime after the third Friday count, Patrick, like say February, Susan, we'd come back. Again, assuming we'd be giving you updates along the way from a very high level rather than this detailed. And then we would bring this back to you again. So we bring it to you February and then bring it to you next June again. And again, I say February because that second, third Friday count is critical in our assumptions as well. Any thoughts on that?
I would agree with you, Joel. I think that coming back in February also is a good time to look at the forecast because that typically February is a point where you would kick off budget preparations for the upcoming year.
And Patrick, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Kristen.
Okay, and Patrick, this is a question for you. So this isn't your first district. You've worked in other districts. You know how this 5-year projection budgeting works. I'm sure we're not the only district that has numbers that look like we're kind of falling off the reservation by the end of the 5-year forecast. So in those situations, when districts have that happen to them, what are some ways that you figure it out when you get to those points? I mean, what do other districts do, or what have you seen other districts do to try to fix that or fix that gap?
So those are some of the drivers where we'll look at, for example, reductions in some of the non-programmatic expenses. Are there efficiencies that we can continue to bring in? We look at different programs that we're doing in the schools that have been in place for a while. Review those programs. Are they still delivering the results that we had anticipated, or are there some programs that we can drop in favor of supports that go elsewhere? This is where we look at what we can do for potential salary increases down the road. This helps us look at whether or not we need to be looking at changes in healthcare and some of our healthcare offerings. So there are a fair number of levers that we can pull and buttons that we can push and switches that we can throw. But again, it's more of an internal exercise with the administrative team where we can look at these numbers and say, okay, in 2 years, we're looking to be facing a budget deficit. Where can we trim some expenses that are going to help us weather that storm? So,
and we've been given that direction from the board to continue to look at reducing costs that don't impact the classroom to a certain degree, obviously. One could assume every decision does, but we will continue to do that. It's been ongoing. As I mentioned to a school board member earlier today, we've been dealing with these deficits since I've been here. and we've had to make some tough decisions along the way, certainly, but we still continue to do great things on behalf of our students and their families here. So, again, we'll continue to look for those efficiencies on a continual basis.
Hey, Patrick, I know you've touched on in some previous meetings about refinancing some of the debt, and I know it's one of those things where I don't really like to stretch our debt out longer, but we kind of have a cliff out in like year 10 where all of a sudden we go from $5 million a year to almost nothing. Is that something we could look at too, of maybe refinancing a couple of those loans to free up $700,000 or $1 million a year, a couple of years early, and stretch some of that out so that we're a little bit more balanced on our debt load?
Well, that's a great idea, Mitch. As a matter of fact, I have a meeting tomorrow, a virtual meeting with Michelle Weiberg from PMA Financial. I don't know that we're necessarily going to be able to get to your $1 million mark, but we are going to be discussing some callable debt that we can potentially refinance that will bring some annual savings. It won't necessarily shorten our debt, the debt period. It's not going to extend our debt period, but it would potentially bring some annual savings to the district. I think $1 million is a bit of a stretch, but between probably $40,000 and $60,000 a year, I think is definitely a possibility. So we are going to be I'm going to have a meeting with that tomorrow because our callable debt comes up in, I believe it's December.
Okay, excellent. And then, I think that's a great idea. I mean, that definitely helps us on the efficiency piece and reduces our rate. But I think also looking at if we could possibly stretch some of that out, like I said, to maybe get us to maybe 500 or 1,000, 500,000 or $1 million in debt reduction, or stretched out so that we can have a more balanced budget. Because otherwise, I'm just worried that we're going to defer a bunch of maintenance and then all of a sudden be flush with cash and just be dumping a bunch of money into broken things, as opposed to doing a little more proactive maintenance, if we can do some of that.
And that's definitely going to be part of my conversation with PMA tomorrow.
Perfect. Thanks, Patrick.
Back to the question that Susan was asking about how often we're going to review this forecast. I'm wondering, will the 5-year forecast be mentioned at the budget hearing in August as well, so that more of the public hopefully can see it?
Yes.
Yes, we definitely can work that into our annual meeting presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick and Jill, for putting this together. This is something that we did task the administration with doing. I think it just helps us as a board to understand when we're making those decisions on either the cost or the revenue side, to understand our cost cutting or adding cost, to understand how our decisions impact future. And so we're not making them just in looking at the current budget, but how it can potentially impact future budgets as well. So I think revisiting this at least twice a year, and then potentially looking at it when we are making a significant decision that will have an impact on it in the future as well, would be very beneficial for the board.
That sounds good. We'll add that to our calendar to have a follow-up or a revisit in February, and then again in sometime around next June as well. And again, should anything happen intermittently due to COVID type stuff or legislative type issues, and or like you just mentioned, Amy, if the board is looking to make another substantial decision, that this would be taken into context as well.
And Patrick, you mentioned it's a rolling or living document. So is it, each year you're able to add on the 5th year each time, so you're continuously adding to it? Is that the plan?
That's correct. The way the budget forecast works is when we set our final budget in December, that goes to DPI. Those numbers get dropped into the forecast as our final budget, and then next year we add another year to it as a projected budget. And when the budget is audited, we upload those final numbers into the forecast, and it just always kind of rolls forward. So we always have 5 years in the forecast.
Okay, great. Any other discussion or questions? All right, we'll move on to item B, which is our Year 3 progress report on the 2017-2020 strategic plan.
Yeah, so part of the reason why we are bringing this to your attention now is because we essentially have completed the last 3-year strategic plan. What we provided to the board were just some high-level descriptions of our accomplishments to date, as well as areas where we may not have come out where we would have liked to. And so what this will allow us to do, and what this has done for us, is this is now the springboard into our 2020-2023 strategic plan. Our goal was to at least provide this to the board so that you at least had an update of where we were at with the last one. And then our goal is to bring you a draft 2020-2023 strategic plan at your next board meeting or sometime in the next couple months. Because we do know that the board has also done some work independently. And so should the board want to include and align some of the goals that they have been working on into our strategic plan, that we have this as a district strategic plan, not the school board having its own goals and ideas and so on, and the rest of the district having separate ones. Our goal is to have a concerted effort that this is the district strategic plan, and that incorporates all of our work and that of the school board as well. So again, we didn't plan on getting into all the detail here. Essentially, again, we looked at all the high-level topics, provided some detail to that, and again, what's great about having goals is it allows us to plan ahead, and that will drive our school action plans as well as our district action plans. And so, it's kind of like a cascading model. And as a professional learning community, having those goals is critical to our mission and our vision, and then reaching those, or seeking the attainment of that mission vision through those goals is what we're trying to articulate. They're essentially pulled together as a result of our 4 strategic goals, which are, as you all know, we want to make sure our students graduate ready for college careers and future opportunities. We want to attract, retain, and honor high-quality staff. We want to promote fiscal responsibility that reflects a commitment to student learning, and we want to develop mutually beneficial relationships in the community. So those are the 4 essential hubs to our efforts, and as with that then is where we build out our strategic plan. Again, at a very high level, we don't get into all the weeds here. At the strategic plan level, the weeds happen at the district action plan, which then drives the school action plans, which then essentially drives our teacher goals and our staff goals as well on an individual basis, so that we are aligned, our efforts are aligned, and this is a critical piece. And so, again, this is an update, and we plan on bringing you the draft strategic plan at an upcoming school board meeting.
And yeah, I would like to just echo that we did as a board probably about a year ago now, last summer, work on some of our board objectives. It has been a while, so I would like to suggest that we as a board meet again in a working session, potentially in July, to revisit those objectives and goals and revise them so that, as Joe mentioned, we can look at this future plan to be combined with the district, the board, and just be aligned at that level. So then we can post that on our district website. So I'll be looking to send out some days and times that work to do a board workshop, potentially in July, some evening in July that we can get together and do that as well.
Yeah, again, Amy, we can provide you the draft ahead of time and that to the board so that they can kind of look at, within that context of how some of those things probably already align, I would assume, and if there are gaps, where we could place them.
Okay, great, thank you. Moving on to item C, which is to discuss, approve employee handbook revisions.
So these revisions are done on an annual basis. What's nice is this time around, we had the opportunity to run this past the Personnel Committee. And I don't want to speak for the Personnel Committee, but this has been presented to them, and they do support the recommended changes to the employee handbook. We may in the near future need to include an addendum to the handbook related to COVID-19 items, as well as possibly some of the Title IX changes. I think the Title IX changes will likely be done more at a policy level, and that is something that we'll be bringing back to the Personnel Committee. But at this time, WASB has provided some working drafts, but they are still in process, and we do need further review. So as a result of that, again, the changes aren't necessarily significantly substantive. They do relate to certain things of which have been provided, like adjusting certain things as it relates to pay throughout the month. We would still do 2 times a month, but doing them at different dates for various reasons, and other changes. But again, nothing substantively different as it relates to our work. And it's really just a matter of clarification in our efforts. I wasn't sure if the chair, Kate, of the Personnel Committee wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, we did go through them, in detail in our meeting last week. Like Joe said, it's primarily payroll related because of the new payroll system that rolled out. So changes in the pay dates, not the frequency. Front loading some of the PTO stuff just to make it easier for accounting and accrual calculations. Some jury duty and subpoena clarification. So, Susan and I were at that meeting. We asked a lot of questions, just trying to understand what the changes were. And I agree with what Joe said. They're really not substantial changes, that are going to impact our staff. It's really just more to align with the new payroll system and to make things clearer for staff so there's better understanding of what we have in place.
So as a result, we would recommend approval of the handbook changes approved as presented.
Do I have a motion?
This is Kate. I'll move to approve the handbook changes as presented.
Susan, second.
The motion by Ms. Unger, second by Ms. Manley. Any discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Ms. Unger?
Yes.
Ms. Manley?
Yes.
Ms. Crosby?
Yes.
Mr. Palmer?
Yes.
Mr. Kurth?
Yes.
Ms. Schultz?
Yes.
Ms. Wondercheck?
Yes.
The motion passes. That brings us to item D, re-entry task force presentation.
So as we've let the board know in previous updates, which were a bit more informal, really those updates were related to the I should say, it's still a current school year until June 30, even though students aren't in session. we were also really trying to focus on what we were going to do differently as a result of COVID-19 for summer school. And as we've been able to solidify some of those things, we can now focus on reentry for next fall. And so what we were asked to do was to actually bring a more formal presentation to the school board as it related to our thoughts about reentry come next fall. I will start with the first slide. Essentially, we've had a task force in place that we actually had in place prior to our shutdown back in March. We had actually been informally working together, but then we had pulled together a task force. I think it was maybe 2 to 3 weeks before the actual shutdown, as we were anticipating some of the things coming down the pike. Certainly, we would have never imagined that we would be gone from that day in March all the way through the rest of the school year. But certainly this team that we've been working with that's noted here certainly have played a critical part in our efforts. I do want to also mention that as late as last month, we did send out surveys to our students and families that were somewhat high level as it related to COVID-19 type things, but we did seek that feedback, and we will continue to seek that feedback via surveys, at least with families, and then other staff feedback throughout as we move our efforts forward. Certainly, if we can get to the next slide, just want to provide that we've essentially had 3 goals for this task force, and this is in no particular order, but certainly we needed to make an adjustment from in-person to a virtual curriculum option for students, not only for this spring, but also as we head into next fall. And I'll kind of get into more detail of what that means. Certainly, we've already developed safety guidelines for our staff to minimize exposure risk to COVID-19. We provided that to the board, and I think there is a link here at some point in the presentation. We will continue to develop safety guidelines for students and families to minimize exposure risk to COVID-19, and certainly we will have that in place. So next slide, please. But those have been our ongoing goals with this group. Just want to point out that we don't operate and as a group independently of others. That certainly shape a lot of the way that we move forward. And that includes the Waukesha County health guidelines. I'm in constant contact with other district leaders as well as some of our cabinet members. Dr. Sanders has been working with her counterparts with other Waukesha County folks, Patrick from the business side, food service, all the way through. We are not working in isolation. We are relying significantly on our counterparts because we do think that this will impact us similarly, yet we still need to have that opportunity for local control. I want to point out that there's been a lot of social media and media around the DPI, or the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction's release of their Education Forward guidance. There is a link on this presentation for you to retrieve that should you need to. That's certainly caused a lot of, I'm not going to say consternation, but a lot more questions that need to be answered. And we'll at least try to address some of those here yet tonight. But again, I'll kind of get into the whole issue of our planning is subject to change, and I'll get into that in a second. We have also reviewed the CDC safety guidelines for schools. We've worked with Hanover Research Institute on best practices and K-12 school districts as it relates to this. And then we also refer to national and particularly international guidelines for returning to school. So other countries that experienced the COVID-19 pandemic impact sooner than we did, and how they responded to re-entry back into the schools there. Next slide, please. As we all have become very well aware, the situation has been and remains fluid. What we are presenting now, literally at this moment, could change within the hour, tomorrow, next week, and certainly by the end of the summer. That's what's happened over the course of the last several months. A lot of change and a lot of fluctuation on what we can do, can't do, should do, and so on and so forth, and that will continue. We are hoping to be able to have our decisions made as a result of data-driven planning and outcomes. So we are working closely with the Waukesha County Health Department on further closures, quarantine safety measures, et cetera. Please note that this is no different as it relates to COVID-19 as it is with other things related to influenza, other things, that would have a tendency to shut things down. The whooping cough, certainly is another thing that, again, we will typically work closely with the Waukesha Health Department, and we do not work in isolation. I hate to inform us of this fact, but we are planning for another disruptive school year, as in the entire school year. As was laid out by DPI today in their release, some of the things that they mentioned in their work is that they are anticipating this type of fluidity and flexibility needed in K-12 schools at least for the next 12 to 18 months. And that's how we're entering into this next school year. That includes plans to re-enter, as well as plans while we have school or during school disruptions that include quarantines and things such as that we just need to be prepared to deal with the potential of what the data will be telling us. We will need the support of Waukesha County, as mentioned, and we will especially need families at this point. Not like we never had before, but we cannot expect the school district to do everything as relates to trying to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 in our schools if we want to get back into our schools. So, for example, feasibility is a critical piece to all of this. To try and take the temperatures of 4,200 kids across 6 schools as they enter in and or leave our buildings is not feasible. That is one example of where we really need families to, A, don't send your kid to school if they're sick, keep them home, and 2, take their temperature. Take their temperature, and if it's above that certain threshold that's being suggested by the county, keep them home. We will certainly be proactive in keeping an eye out, but we can't certainly, again, as mentioned, feasibility and common sense has to prevail at some point if we want to get kids back into our schools. And that's what we mean by getting that parental type of support. But again, we have very supportive parents and families in our school district. We trust that they'll be able to help us through that. And we're working with the county on determining, this is how the families could help. This is how kids can help. And then this is how schools can help. And again, really pulling together to make sure that we're doing what we can to be as preventive as possible in our efforts. Next slide, please. The mantra of stay safe to stay open in Waukesha County has been implemented in order to have Waukesha County government, community organizations, and business leaders promote these 4 concepts, which, again, I think we're all becoming very, very familiar with at this time. The county is looking at developing an arm of this as it relates to schools. So the mantra of staying safe to stay open in Waukesha County schools is something that we'll be continuing to get support on from Waukesha County. And so probably the biggest statement that I want to be able to make tonight is that we do plan to open schools as safe as feasibly possible next fall, while also providing alternative options for those who may need or seek them. But again, that's the biggest piece that I want to make reference to tonight, is that our default option is to get kids back in schools. We need to get kids back in schools to be able to educate them in a manner that is intended to be, and not kind of like this emergency type education that we were forced to go into throughout this spring. Again, we will provide alternatives that we think will be better than the emergency instruction and learning that happened. We'll do a much better job of that now that we have more time to plan. But again, we want our kids back in school, open our schools as safe and as feasibly possible next fall. Next slide, please. What this next slide will show is a timeline of where we have been and where we plan to go. And so essentially it shows a couple of things that we've already done. As mentioned, we've done the family survey with some high-level questions related to virtual and blended learning. And I'll kind of talk a little bit about an updated survey that we plan on sending with much more depth and detail now that we kind of have a better idea of where we're at. We also have been already doing reentry scenario planning. We have considered various options that have been mentioned by DPI and determined their feasibility. Whether it was a full in-person, full virtual, a hybrid model with some alternating days, and we have mentioned this in the past, and then full in-person with virtual option, which is the scenarios that we've currently landed in. Again, we did just receive that guidance today. It's a pretty lengthy document, so just bear with us. We just got off a call at about 2 o'clock today where we did hear directly from DPI and other state organizations related to some either concerns, issues, and just general education of what their guidance meant. And certainly we were very happy to get that direction and guidance. And again, the next step at this point for us is to survey our families, and we plan on doing that as soon as we can. Again, what we want to be able to do is we were waiting for this guidance from DPI. We will now be looking to get further information from Waukesha County now that they also have this information, and then that will drive some of the survey questions that we plan on asking families to be done in early July. Obviously, the 4th of July and trying to send out a survey and trying to get a response rate that's at a very high level, because that's what we want, is critical. So that's something we're taking into consideration, but we want to talk about some of the safety concerns that are on the minds of our parents, the supports needed, and then what exactly are they seeking as far as a learning preference. Again, to be able to go back and, we did ask some high-level questions, but literally so much has changed in the last, plus month or so. And now that we've got this DPI guidance, we really want to kind of save our judgment for what families are really thinking until we get that data back from this proposed survey. We'll also continue, as we have been, to continue to gather staff input, and then we hope to communicate out to families and staff as we start gathering that data, as we start, pulling that stuff together, rolling out a communication on what folks should expect for reentry come next fall. Next slide, please. So I did want to point out that the DPI Education Forward guidelines are really just that, and they clarified that with us today, that they are guidance and they are not mandated. They are not requirements or mandates. And so a couple of things that they had mentioned that are mentioned in their Education Forward guide are several options for reopening school next fall. Again, as mentioned, these are things that we've already been considering the feasibility of. And that is, could we do a 4-day week? And their rationale is to have a 5th day to be able to either deep clean and or do what we were doing with our current efforts this spring, focus on individual interventions with students, allow for additional planning for staff. It would still be a 5-day work week, but it'd be a 4-day week for students. Again, that is something that we've talked about internally already, a 2-day rotation, an AB week rotation, and only having actually the elementary come into our schools. So our elementary kids would be scattered throughout the entire district, including the secondary schools, and then having our secondary students do virtual learning only. Again, these are things that we've heard other districts talking about, considering. We've had our own conversations, and And we just want to just kind of mention that if you go to the next slide, kind of gives our rationale as to why we landed where we did and again, based on feasibility of getting our kids back to school. So specifically, why would we move forward with a 5-day full opening plan at this time? Well, we consider the feasibility of guidance and we have concerns with resources. In order to implement what's been provided in this guide, it's going to be extremely expensive to do so. Now, mind you, I do not take that lightly when I say, should we be doing this? Should we be doing that? Shouldn't we? We have to think about the resources that we have available. Like Patrick just said, while yes, we do have, some additional fund balance for next year, we don't know what the future impacts of the funding schools will be in the near future. So to be able to add the resources that we would need to fully implement what's being guided to us by DPI would not work. In their guidelines, they mention suggested 10-to-1 student staff ratio. We certainly could not do that without adding significant amounts of staff. Not just staff resources, but physical space. Please note, though, that the DPI did acknowledge that they may be looking at putting out an update to this guideline in the near future, and I do applaud them for listening to our feedback as related to the suggestions made by those that will have to implement what's been provided. Also, the notion of the undue continued pressure on families. We've heard from many people about the negative impact that this has had on them, their families, and not just that, but just the quality quality level of education that we're providing our students. Also, if we had alternating days or kids staying home an extra day during the week, what would that then mean for even our own employees to try and alternate schedules, days off during the week? And like if a teacher or somebody has a kid in Pewaukee and they've got a different day than we do, and then it just, again, we looked at the feasibility and we just didn't think it was possible. We do also have capacity and resources to provide cleaning without taking a day off. So in talking to Andy Stefanson and Patrick Miller, we have no problem finding a third shift to be able to come in and do a deep clean during the school week without having to take another day off and still meeting the minimum requirements and then some, because we do have those resources available at our disposal. Next slide, please. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of these other ones because I don't want to get into too much detail. I wanted to provide this high-level update, but I just want to let you know that we already do have staff safety guidelines in place. Please know that right now we are requiring masks and face shields when necessary for staff, but that certainly could change come next fall with our reentry. We do have a daily reentry health screener that our staff complete, basically affirming that they do not have a fever or that they do not feel ill, so that they're constantly thinking about, should I be heading into the workspace or not, and being vulnerable, having others be vulnerable to what could be my potential sickness. If you go to the next slide, a lot of similar things as it relates to student learning. We've been working with elementary and secondary subcommittees. We're trying to determine expectations for student learning. That's critical to us. And then, we're trying to determine the best instructional practices for in-person and distance learning, given everything that we have before us. If we could just go to the next slide again, I do want to just iterate this next point as well. While we recognize that for many of our folks, sending their kids back to school they're going to be comfortable with. Other families may not be. And so what we will be providing next year is a total virtual learning option that will be available to families who request a need for it for the entire school year. This total virtual option will be supported by district teachers and staff. And it will likely look much different than what we experienced this spring. Again, as mentioned, what we did this spring was an emergency type situation, not a lot of time to plan, not a lot of time to implement as well as we think we could have done, given the fact that now we have time to learn from our mistakes and put together a plan that will truly make an impact in our students and their learning with this distance virtual option. Next slide. As mentioned with the staff, we do have safety precautions for staff, and we continue to work on this with student safety as well. And again, at this point, it's mitigating safety efforts, you know, and essentially just making sure that we put as many precautions in as we feasibly can to make things as safe as we can. And again, don't want to get bogged down to the detail. You know, sure, you can ask me a question, but there are so many, you know, with the DPI guidance and then still waiting to hear from the county, I'd really rather prefer we hold off on more of this detail at a future meeting and don't want to get bogged down in the details at this time. Next slide again, there's been a lot of questions related to athletics and activities. We continue to follow the guidance from the county regarding mass gatherings. WIAA has recently sent out an update. They will continue to send an update, and it's based off of the conversation held this afternoon with DPI and others. WIAA members were at the table suggesting that they would be bringing updates at a future, in the near future. And again, we will continue to adhere to local, state, and federal recommendations and guidelines as best we can and as best as it's feasible. Last slide is really just a friendly reminder. Our planning is subject to change. The situation has been and remains fluid. It could change at any time. We're going to use data to drive our planning and outcomes and the support of others. We're planning for another disruptive school year, possibly even further, as suggested by DPI. And we will need the support of the county officials, county resources, our families and staff, and other stakeholders throughout this process. So with that, Amy, I'm not sure if you'd want to open it up to questions, but that is the conclusion of my presentation at this time. And again, I'd rather not get into all the details of, you know, what in that scenario versus that scenario, because I can tell you what I think today. We can literally talk about this because there are so many layers to this thing. We could talk literally probably for the next 24 hours about all the different scenarios. But again, that's with just getting that guidance today, still waiting to get the guidance from the county. You know, I'm afraid I'd just be, you know, getting too far into the details unnecessarily at this time.
I will open it up just to high-level comments or questions, but again, as Joe stated, you know, some of them might be deferred just based on the information that's coming through.
Hey, Joe, I have one quick question on the teachers. So if we do an online learning, would we be looking at polling one staff member? And it's going to all depend, I guess, on what you get back from numbers, but would we be looking at polling a few teachers from the classroom and having a few less classrooms and then managing a full virtual learning? Or how do you exactly see that working?
Yeah, so the data will drive that. So like you said, Mitch, once we get that feedback from our parents, first we need to know like what grade level are we talking? And then, you know, like for example, it's a lot easier to pull together a virtual learning course at the secondary level than it is, say, at like the kindergarten level. And so, you know, there may be some adjustments, but the data will drive that. We're also looking at being flexible with all of the resources that we have. So, for example, we do have in-district instructional coaches that may need to, for the first semester and or for the year, or even some of our administrators, to have to make some adjustments, that these unprecedented times, we can't stick in the same mold of where we were in a typical school year. So, maximizing the resources that we have, not just necessarily teachers. Now, I do believe that we will be utilizing our own staff to do that. We will do that. To what degree, I don't know. But then also maximizing other resources that we have to fulfill our efforts on that virtual learning side.
Excellent. Thanks, Joe. I appreciate you guys being flexible with this and working through this. I think you guys are doing a great job, and I appreciate it. Thanks.
That's one thing that we've learned, is that flexibility is key here, and we've certainly learned from that. And even throughout the spring, with the changes that we made throughout the spring, based on feedback we received, it's not a stagnant. We can't be we can't be static in our efforts, and we need to kind of just continue to do the best that we can with the resources that we have.
So Joe, a point of clarification on the slide that talked about opening with a 5-day full plan. Are you saying that that is what we're planning to do? Or was this a hypothetical? Why would we consider that in light of the DPA recommendations? It seems kind of in conflict with what you're saying, where we're still reviewing the DPI stuff that just came out today and waiting for a response from the county.
The reason why I can tell you that the 5-day full opening plan at this time is what we would recommend moving forward with is because we have vetted all those other options that they mentioned, and we did not find them to be feasible for all the reasons that we have listed in that slide. And I guess it would be the slide after, which is the concerns that we had related to their guidelines.
Are there these questions that you're going to ask on the parent survey? I mean, I am a parent who is letting my child do basically nothing this summer. I am not thrilled about the idea of sending him back to school with basically no precautions in place, full load of 650 kids at Reagan.
Yeah, I think one of the options. Yeah, I was going to say one of the options. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
We are in process of determining what that survey will look like. We do have sample surveys that have been done in other districts already that we can kind of rely on. And but again, we're trying to get the best gauge of where our families are at with their comfort level of sending kids back to school.
Well, I feel like we should get that information before we say we are going back to school 5 days a week. And is that something that the board is going to have input into? I mean, I would really like to hear more on why you think none of these options are feasible. And we don't, again, have to get into it right now, but I feel like this one presentation, while other districts are meeting 5-6 times over the next few months to make their decisions, seems rather dismissive of the public health information that was provided today and has been provided ongoing from the CDC.
And we refer to our county guidance, which again, another iteration that DPI mentioned is things will look different in different places for all the various reasons. To think that we have been dismissive of any thoughts, I guess I would push back on that. We've been working on this for months. I've been providing updates to the school board on behalf of our administrative team and that of our professional staff as well at every board meeting since this COVID shutdown. We have not been dismissive, and if that's the impression that you're getting, we apologize for that, as that's not been our intent.
I mean, I agree you've been providing updates, but the updates have been, we're talking about it, we're waiting for recommendations. Well, here are the recommendations today from DPI, and I understand that's not a mandate, but that doesn't mean that the day it comes out, we should say we're not going to do any of it without explaining where you're getting that data. The parent survey that went out was the normal annual survey that had 2 questions added on about virtual learning.
That's why we're doing
DPI. Sorry, I was just going to say, it took DPI a long time to get this out. Our school district has been working on this before DPI got their stuff out. So I feel like, it's not that we've been dismissive. We've been on top of it. We've been quicker at it. at our district here than the state has. I think we should give them some credit for that. I'm also very happy to see that the plan is to go back in the fall. I think a lot of parents want that assurance. That's what I keep hearing from parents, and I think it's wonderful that we do have that virtual opportunity because, you know, everybody does have a different risk tolerance. Everybody does have different opinions about, you know, the severity of COVID. So that does give options. You know, if you want to send your child back to school, there'll be that option. If you don't feel comfortable, there'll be a virtual option, which will be better than what we had in the spring.
This is
Some concern about going back to school with your children. I mean, I think there's that virtual option. That's absolutely in play for a family to choose. And I mean, I think we're going to get some feedback from this, and I don't know that this is the final decision, but I think from the guidance that I've heard from every family I've talked to, I shouldn't say from most families I've talked to, is they've really pushed for the 5-day a week. I don't know how we would follow the 10-to-1 guidance that DPI has in there. I mean, do you have a way for us to fund the education system to have a 10-to-1 ratio?
When I read it, the 10-to-1 ratio did not apply to the regular classroom. It applied to special ed, gifted and talented groups, any sort of small groups that were being, or specialized groups that were being pulled out of classes, not the regular classroom. But I mean, I would like some more information about what are we doing? And I know it says forthcoming for how we're going to be socially distancing, but if you're going to ask parents to send their kids back to school full time with the full load of students, we need to give some more information about what is going to be done. Or is lunch going to be changed? Are classrooms going to be spread out? Like, what is that going to look like? It can't look like last school year. It needs to be different. So how is it going to be different if we're sending kids back full time?
Yeah, I would totally agree that it's not going to look like it did the day we left before the shutdown. It's going to look different. And again, we will be able to provide some of those details to the board as well as to families as we gather this data. But again, to, you know, as initially, with the CDC guidance, it was like we could only get 10 or 11, 12 kids on a school bus. We could only get 10 kids in a classroom possibly. An A and B day is not possible based on the CDC guidelines. We'd have to have actually like a C day because we have that many kids in our school to be able to make it feasible to follow to the letter of the CDC. Again, they are guidelines, not requirements. And so that's why we are relying on our local officials, which has been suggested by DPI and other state officials, that we can't just take a blanket covering and assume that it's going to fit for every school district, because it won't, for various reasons. But certainly, Kate, we will take your comments, questions, concerns into consideration. Again, today was meant as a high level. We'll continue to take the board's feedback all the way through, and we'll continue to provide more detail as we move forward, for sure.
This is Chrislyn. I would join Kate in her concerns about, and I think, Joe, I feel, and I don't want to speak for Kate, so Kate, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when Kate said that she felt that concerns were being dismissed, I think it's with regard to what was offered today with the DPI. Just today, we all received this DPI guidelines report dated June 22nd, where they made these several suggestions about how a safe return to school could look in their view. I think the dismissal in my view, was of those proposed guidelines. And, Joe, in fairness to you and your team, I mean, I know you just received those today, but from the presentation that we got, I mean, the presentation that was first offered in the packet, the 12-page PowerPoint, was different than the 16-page one. And in the 16-slide presentation, it looks as though everything the DPI offered was received today and dismissed. And I agree with Kate that I think that this board should be voting on what that return looks like from a high level. Should we do a 5-day return? Should we do a 4-day week? Should we do a 2-day rotation? What should we do? But I do think that this board should be making decisions about that high level return, because we are the ones who are ultimately responsible for the decisions that this district makes above all. And this is such an important decision. I think that we need to have the vote on that issue, and every board member should be responsible for their vote. And that's my view on it. And I think that to just say, well, go ahead, administration, do whatever you think, when it looks to me from this presentation as though administration has fully dismissed any of these guidance guidelines from the DPI in less than 24 hours, that's of concern to me.
Hey, Amy, I think we should probably take, I think we should probably take the guidance that Joe, all the board members should be able to get a quick little 2 minutes, speak their mind here and give Joe the guidance. Because
At this meeting?
Yeah, I don't think we can do it tonight. I mean, I looked at that presentation from DPI for maybe 10 minutes because I heard about it at 2 o'clock today while I was working. I mean, I agree with Crystal, and you were correct in what I was talking about when I said dismissive, but I think we should vote, but I don't think we can vote today because we have just seen Joe's presentation and we have just seen the DPI information.
it's not a vote. There's nothing binding about it. It's just giving Joe the direction of the feedback we've gotten from families we've spoken to and what we've researched and what we've looked at and our thoughts on how we can make this work. I mean, I think we owe it to Joe to give him that guidance. We're saying that what he's doing now is not correct, but then we're going to say we're not going to give him guidance. We're going to give him 2 more weeks. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense to me.
I think we should go up of anecdotal, I talked to this family or this family. I feel like we need to thoroughly digest the DPI report, which I understand, Joe, you've talked about some of those things already, but this is kind of the first that the board is hearing about it. I feel like we should do a survey before we make any decisions about what we are or not doing. And just because we can't meet the CDC guidelines for how many kids are in the building doesn't mean we shouldn't at least try to cut down the amount of kids in our building by half by doing an AB or 2-day rotation model.
So that seems to be a bit in conflict. So we're getting feedback from the busing because it's an inconsistent schedule. And then if we look to do the AB, that's inconsistent. So I'm just saying it's
saving money. And we didn't survey the public about the bus thing
and
either.
I don't think we should. I think they vote us in and we vote based on our constituents. But what I guess I feel like we're all over the place, and that's what we keep giving the administration, mixed messages. So perhaps we need to have a conversation just around this topic because it's important. But I hear a lot of mixed views just listening. So I don't know what we expect the administration to do with that.
I think that, Susan, to your point, I think that administration should be bringing the community to the table so that we can find out what people are comfortable with. And I think that when you talk about, I mean, what Joe has proffered in this presentation is basically if somebody doesn't feel safe sending their kid back to school, then they can have a virtual learning option. Well, that sounds lovely. However, what doesn't sound lovely to me is making our teachers do double the work if they have to have a cohort of live kids and then they have a cohort of virtual kids. How is that going to go? But we won't know who wants virtual learning and who wants in-person learning unless we ask them. So I think we need to ask them. I think that you can make these generalizations, but without input from the community on what, it's one thing, Mitch, to say, oh, well, I talked to this family and I talked to that family. That's all good and well, but those are just anecdotes. And we need people to put their fingers to the keyboard and say, yes, I want to send my kid back for a 5-day week. Or no, I don't want to send my kid back for a 5-day week. And yes, I want virtual. No, I don't want virtual. We need people to answer those questions so that we know what the cohorts are going to look like so that we can actually plan for it. Right now, we've made an awful lot of assumptions.
And that is on the reentry timeline. Survey is estimated early July.
Reentry plan. Joe is doing that. We're yelling at him for not doing that.
So the survey to families addresses safety concerns, support, and learning preferences for families. And that's the data he's looking to use when we're making decisions on this, is that's that data-driven decisions.
Yeah,
So
Amy,
we
and
are
it
surveying.
just sounds like based on this, we are going back 5 days full. Sounds like the decision has already been made. And I think the decision cannot already be made. We need to get that survey information. And I think July is a fine timeline, seeing as we're almost at the end of June. But we can't say this is what we're already doing when we haven't actually gotten that information.
And I think my understanding of this is that we are going to survey. We need to understand that, obviously, so we know what that looks like in the fall. Our preferred method, and maybe not everybody on the board agrees, is that in-person learning is better than virtual learning. And so we would like to, move forward with that if that's feasible at this time.
And I do not disagree that in-person is favorable. I would love to send my son back to school if we're going to be taking serious safety precautions and not just, I don't know, pretending like we are by not really considering anything the DPI has said. I mean, virtual learning is not ideal for anyone, but neither is going back to a building with 650 people when large gatherings are still not recommended.
I think we also need to look at what businesses are doing. So people are going back to work. Businesses are making a lot of accommodations, and they're doing different things based on what is going on in that particular organization. So, I mean, there's a lot of examples out there that I'm sure the administration is looking at, as well as talking to other districts. I would think the best, not the worst, and I'm hearing.
Again, I do agree
We're
with
not
you,
doing
Susan, but I don't think any of those things are included in this presentation.
That's fair. And I think Joe said it was preliminary. And so, Joe, you're going to come back with more?
Yeah, I mean, there is the student safety precautions page. We didn't go through all of them through here, but the task force is looking at, or the committee looking at all the, what's the lunch going to look like? What's the classroom configuration going to look like? Locker usage, bus safety. I mean, it is all in here. He just didn't go into detail on all of them. So
Yeah,
I would move forward with the survey like we have planned. We get that data before, so we can make those decisions based on data.
Yeah, we can't go into the granular detail of what exactly that plan's going to be and every minutia of that. I mean, that's for Joe and his team to handle.
Correct. That is not at all what I'm asking. I'm upset that we have made a decision that we're going back 5 days full load without actually having a discussion about it or talking to our families. That is my only complaint.
No one has made that decision yet.
Per the presentation, and what I just asked Joe at the very beginning of my comments was that a decision, and he said yes.
I believe he said that was his preference, but I'll let Joe speak for himself.
I think that
that this is where we are today at this moment. And, to continue to, and again, we've been reviewing these various options for months. We'll continue to review those options as needed, but we also need to have some sort of, we can't just continue to build off of certain scenarios because we can spend so much time on a specific scenario that is, again, not feasible. We can't afford to bring in a multitude of extra staff members. We can't feasibly transport 10 to 12 kids. Again, if we're taking the approach that's similarly being done at the county level with businesses, we want to stay safe to stay open. And certainly this is just I wanted to just let you know this is where we are now. We'll continue to gather feedback. Certainly if we are the only school district that's looking at this, then I will circle back and say, well, this is what other districts around us are doing that I think we need to go back and reconsider. Certainly we're open to that. But we also need to be clear to our families of what our goal is, and that's to get kids back at school. as soon as possible. And doing that, again, is, as I mentioned, it is safe as feasibly possible for next fall. But, I can understand, Kate, your concerns. We certainly share much of those as well. And again, yes, we added these extra slides, as soon as we could, before this meeting, just because we had just gotten that information. I guess I would, I think I wouldn't necessarily disagree that I do believe the school board, because this is such a significant issue, back to Chris's point and even Kate's point, I think the board should likely have a vote on this. And I guess I'd look to Amy and Janet, as the board president and vice president, based on the feedback, to let us know, if that's where we're going. Because again, I do think this is a pretty significant matter that we're all unfortunately having to deal with. So I can appreciate those comments and concerns, certainly.
Joe, thanks for that. I appreciate you saying all those things. I think that you're right. I think the board should vote on this. But I really think that what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to vote on some solid plans. And I know, again, you guys just received this stuff from DPI today. I don't expect you to have everything built out. But I would urge you, for whatever you can, I know some other districts are having their task force meet as open meetings for the public, where the public can virtually attend and listen to the discussions. I think that the community is a very, very important part of our decision making, and we need to listen to them and hear what they have to say so that you guys have good data and good comments and, good direction on which to rely in rolling out what those options are that the board members can vote upon. Because none of us as board members are going to sit here and, I plan to read this entire 88-page report, but I am not going to build out what the New Berlin model is going to look like. So in other words, I think that you guys, if you guys can bring to us, look, this is what a 5-day-a-week model looks like. This is what a 4-day-a-week model looks like. This is what a 2-day rotation looks like. This is what an AB week rotation looks like, so that we can make the best decisions we can with informed information. That would be so helpful. Because this is, and I know that this is wildly complicated. I really do. And I apologize that you've got a lot more work to do, but everybody's having to do it. I would also caution that doing the work of a school district is not always akin to doing the work of a business. We are dealing with children. I still have a child who has special needs, and he licks things, for God's sake. So he's not going to be safe necessarily in a school setting if there's full occupancy in the school. So we're not dealing with just little adults. We're dealing with small children sometimes, and they're not a business. So that's something that worries me when that comment's made, because we have other considerations for safety for these little people. So we have to keep that in mind. And I tell you, I'm a parent who would love my children to go back to school 5 days a week, but I only want them to go back when it's safe to do so. And this guidance from DPI leads me to believe that they're not suggesting that it's safe. I know that a lot of the language has been talked about as far as that these are guidelines, they're not rules. They're guidelines because they're best practices. They're not guidelines because they're optional. So I think we have to consider that when we consider these reentry proposals. It is a good idea in a conservative community to be conservative about what we're doing with our children. So I'd ask you to consider that.
I do agree on the issue of us voting. That's been on my mind for a while, that I think that as a school board, we need to be giving better direction to the administration in this area. So I would be very much in favor of us taking a vote once we do get more chance to read over this information we've received today. But just reviewing it, as the word keeps coming up, feasibility is the issue here. So there's a lot of things here to look at, and you have to just keep in mind whether or not it's really going to work. So that's the one thing that I'm really thinking about here with this, is that there might be a lot of options, but none of them are really going to work very well.
All right, so so what I've heard is that we do want to take a vote on this. We're not ready tonight because we need to review that information. I think our next meeting may be too late, so we might have to look at a meeting in between there if this is something we want to dive into and you know, make some direction.
I think we need to know when that survey's scheduled to come back. I think is really the date. Joe, do we have that date, that when you think you'll have the survey results back?
We're still working on that. Certainly, I could probably have that back to you as early as the next couple of days. And, you know, we certainly want that feedback sooner than later. But, yeah, I'll just work with Amy and Janet to try and coordinate, or Diana will coordinate with the full board when the potential for a special meeting could be, which would be before the next regularly scheduled meeting, which isn't until the second meeting in July, since we don't have another meeting in July.
Joe, this is Chrislyn. Can you I have two questions. Have you guys surveyed staff about what they are looking at for the fall, and whether how that would work for them to have to do both in-person and virtual learning?
We will continue to staff. We'll continue to reach out to staff about that. And so I think that's a big assumption that we're making, that we would expect a teacher to be able to do both in person and virtual.
Right. I agree. And I'm a little concerned about that. So I'm glad you feel the same way about that. The other question I have is, as board members, I have some questions that I feel like should be included on the survey. Are you open to members of the board sending you questions that should be included in the survey? And if so, okay, I'd appreciate that. And if we're going to send you questions, when is it ideal for you to have them in your hands?
The sooner the better.
Okay, because the survey, I know you had a sort of a soft timeline that the survey was going to be sent out in the beginning of July. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so the sooner the better. All right. Thank you.
Is there any chance we could see the survey ahead of time before it's sent out? If people have, you know, issues about how the questions are worded.
I would second that request.
All right, so we will present our questions, review the survey, send that out, and when we get the responses back and have time to digest that data, add this to an agenda, either a special meeting or our meeting in July agenda for a vote. All right, the next item is item E, review and discuss Education Foundation of New Berlin financials.
Yeah, so we wanted to provide an update to the board related to the financials for the New Berlin, or the Education Foundation of New Berlin. Essentially, they've brought in revenues from the district of about $340,000. They've expensed about $228,000 since then. That's now been at least a couple of fiscal years, if not more. Much of that, as had been mentioned by some board members previously, had gone to wages and benefits and the work of the executive director that had been employed up until about maybe March, April. And right now that position is vacant. They do have a balance of about $112,000, and they have raised about $123,000 on behalf of the district. What we did want to provide is that initially, as a placeholder for the preliminary budget in Fund 80, we had allocated $20,000, which was much less than the anticipated amount that the MOU had in place. I believe it was $75,000 or $50,000. And again, we had allocated $20,000 as a placeholder. Given some conversations that we've had with leadership at the foundation, given the state of affairs as it relates to the economy, fundraising in general, and so on, we are recommending that we halt any funding for the foundation, at least for the 2020-2021 school year. By doing so, it'll allow them to kind of pivot, make adjustments, essentially get their marketing plan retooled, consider, either a volunteer or part-time director to get them back up and going at some point, and then reevaluate sometime next year to determine any future funding then thereafter. What this means, there is no significant impact on the budget as it relates to our structural deficits or our forecasts. $20,000 in the grand scheme of about a $70 million budget is very small, but note that this $20,000 will have a minimally lower the tax levy amount because, again, Fund 80 allows us to exceed the levy rate to a certain degree. And again, $20,000 in the broader sense would not be that significant, but that would be the impact on the future budget. So with that, again, we're open to conversation, but we were asked to provide these updates. And again, unless we hear anything different from the board, we're going to move forward with halting funding at this time, essentially until further notice, and that we will ask the foundation to give us an update on once they kind of reboot, once they kind of get their updated strategy up in place, what the plans are to move forward as an organization on behalf of the School District of New Berlin.
Hey, Joe, this is Chrislyn. I've got a question on that. So you're making a recommendation that we change what we give them in the 2021 school year. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. How does that impact the memorandum of understanding that we established with them and that we negotiated with them?
It does not impact the financial goals that were set aside for the funding that was to be expected. And again, given the state of affairs, fundraising at this time with people out of work and, still possibly not even getting their unemployment checks yet, to try and ask for dollars at this time may not be in the foundation's best interest. And so rather work with the revenue or the funds that they have within their coffers at this time.
So I don't remember. I mean, we talked about the MOU, several months back and solidified it and everything. Was when you say that they didn't meet their minimum for fundraising, what did the mechanism of the language of the memorandum of understanding allow us to do? Do you remember, or do you have it in front of you?
I don't know.
Okay, I'm just questioning because I know that, with this memorandum of understanding, this was something binding upon us as a district and binding upon them as a foundation. So I don't want to do something that runs afoul of the understanding that we came to with them. So I'm sort of really surprised that we could just say, we're going to halt your trigger by however many, tens of thousands of dollars as is being suggested here. Because the notion of doing the memorandum of understanding was to allow for some predictability in funding and to allow the foundation to actually grow. If we choke it off, then we have spent a lot of money for no good purpose. And that's what I'm a little worried about. So I don't know if we need to.
I think rather than use the terminology choke off, I think we're just hitting pause with all the uncertainty. on where we go. You know, they had an executive director resign. They currently don't have one. They're looking to revamp, pivot, make a change, and then and then also, you know, they did not meet the required numbers that were in there. Again, I don't have that at my fingertips for fundraising. But again, they are putting their best foot forward. I have been in communication with the foundation leadership, and I'd rather just say we're hitting pause rather than just completely choking off. We're still going to be working closely with them as close as we can to ensure that we get dollars funneled in the appropriate areas that we think are critical for these gaps that we can't necessarily take care of within the current Fund 10 budget.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I'm not, maybe it wasn't an awesome choice of words to say we're choking them off, but that's kind of what it looked like to me. So I'm just worried that I don't want to have spent that money for nothing. Like, I think that it didn't work out with the executive director that we had. I'm sure we wouldn't be the first foundation to take a swing and miss either. So I guess if we're hitting pause, I think that's fine. But I don't think that there should be any broad understanding that we're going to defund the foundation entirely. And I hope that's not what's being suggested, whether, overtly or covertly.
I'm certainly going to over. And like I said, I did mention that we would be looking at future funding as they develop their plans, as we work closer with them, as they develop their marketing strategy, and so on. So again, if you felt like I was covertly trying to underhand the foundation, that was not my intent. I've had open dialogues with them throughout this process.
Hey, Joe, do you know how often do they meet?
I know they were meeting at least monthly, and I do know that they just had a meeting as recent as this last month. Again, because of the COVID shutdown and because of their foundation director resigning, they had planned on essentially holding off until at least July or August. And I do know that they're working on some things as we currently speak to kind of offer scholarship or mini grants to our staff related to innovation as it relates to a multitude of things. So I do know that they're not just stagnant, they are working on some things. And I do know that, we've been working with Patrick and Kelly and how we can kind of roll some of those things out. But again, we will continue to work with them in a positive approach. And again, they are meeting at least monthly at this time. And again, just kind of hitting pause and trying to reconfigure their efforts.
Okay, and they haven't made a decision yet about whether they're going to hire another full-time person or a part-time person or any person.
They are still working through that at this time.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to mention, I remember last year voting on this, and I had issues with the amount of funding that was going into future years. And before I voted in favor of it, I did specifically ask if we had to stick with the funding levels. And I was reminded by another board member, and I thought it was Chris Lynn, who pointed out that there was indeed a part in the memorandum that specifically stated that it would be reviewed each year. The funding amount would be reviewed each year, and that it could be adjusted. And so I don't think we really have an issue here with adjusting it. And I'm glad that we are putting it on hold for now, because I really felt that we had already given the foundation a lot of funding. And by year 3, which I believe this is, I really thought we should be stopping by now.
And Janet, I think that's right. But I do think that something like this would require a vote of the board. And I don't think we've taken a vote.
And so like to pull it out
To change what's reflected.
Okay, so not just to vote on it as part of the budget as a whole, but actually to vote on it as a separate issue pulled out.
Because I think I believe so.
Our assumption is that this is for planning as we move forward, approving, the annual meeting and budget hearing as we present that, and then present the original budget for the board to approve in October. We just wanted to clarify this, kind of like we did with the $250,000 for the long-range facilities plan. This is just another one of those assumptions that we made and put in a placeholder that hadn't been determined. And so, yeah, we were just, as we rolled the budget forward, wanted to make sure that this would be included. So however you want to do that, if you want to take an extra vote, feel free. But again, I think, depending on we would just be assuming that this would be included in future budget presentations that we be providing.
I think that we
do not have that as an item for voting tonight necessarily. It is just to review and discuss their financials. So we could certainly, if you want to add that to another meeting, it's up to you.
I'm okay with adding it to another meeting. Is that something, what does everybody else think?
I think that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
I
All
agree.
right, we'll add it to a future meeting.
Okay.
The next item, item F, is the facility committee update. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Homer.
Yeah, so the facilities committee met last a week or two ago. And the number one thing we came up with was looking at how to rank all these criteria. I think we briefly talked about it last year, and we came to some new conclusions on some of this and what we're looking at now with new members and new ideas. If everyone has the facility criteria in front of them, there's 7 rankings that we're looking at. Number 1 is health and safety, security. Number 2 is the laws, regulations, and codes. And then energy savings, and then the ROI on those kind of energy savings projects. Program changes and support at number 4, infrastructure renewal at number 5. So this would be roofs, asphalt, tuck pointing, that kind of stuff. And then number 6 is capacity. We rank this kind of low because we don't really feel like we've got capacity issues at most of our schools right now. And again, this is a living document. So these numbers could certainly change in future years, but we wanted to get a new list of our criteria and rank them, and then figure out where to go from here. And then the last one is non-core mission. So outside of our general education program, this has kind of got a wide variety of we want to update the cafeteria, or we want to update some stuff, and it doesn't necessarily provide a better educational outcome for our kids. It's more of certain areas that we could look at. And so one of the things that we talked about this was alternative funding sources. So this could be the home and school group, or however they would support some of these things. Playgrounds, that kind of stuff that might not really fit into our general education budget, but might fit somewhere else. And then I guess the next piece of this is, once we all agree on if these 7 are the right categories and they're in the right order, then the next piece becomes, how do we want to rank, or how do we want to weight them if we do it all? So do we just give them the first one? Do we rank this 1 through 10? And then the second one, we rank 1 through 9, and so on down the line, so that that first one gets a higher weighting? Or do we want to pick the top 2 or 3 and say that they get a 1.3 rating? And so we just give everything a rating of 1 through 10, and then multiply the top 2 by 1.3 or 3, however we do it. So we wanted to bring this to the full board to get some feedback on how you guys thought this would best be fit. And then the other piece with this is we started looking at how much money do we want to put into the budget every year for facilities maintenance. And the number we came up with, I think it was $250,000 was the number we came up with, and that's in the budget for next year. And again, that's just a placeholder. That's not a final decision, but we wanted to start somewhere that was doable, because we haven't had anything in the past that was actually planned. So I guess I'll open it up to the board for discussion and thoughts on these 7 criteria.
Yeah, actually move us to item G. So that was our update. Item G is to discuss, approve the criteria for the long-range facility plan projects. So do I have a motion to approve it as presented? Can I have a motion, please?
With Janet, I approve the criteria for, wait. I move to approve the criteria for ranking long-range facility plan projects as presented.
Second.
So motion by Ms. Schultz, second by Mr. Kurth. Any discussion?
I just have a quick question. So how does this differ from how it's been done in the past? Because I know we did some things with health and safety and security were always top. I mean, did any of this move around or has it just been refined?
Yeah, some of it, there was like 9 or 10 categories, so we combined, like health and safety were one and then security was another. We kind of combined some of these so that it wasn't as cumbersome trying to go through 7 or 8 or 10 ranking systems. So we tried to reduce that and then renamed a couple of them too. Like we had energy savings, but then we kind of added the ROI for other projects too. So there was a good mixing of elimination, addition, and changing.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion? So, approving this will help the facility committee to move forward. Also, it will allow our administration to look at the projects that we have on our long-range plan, kind of refresh it with this new criteria so that we have that document again, it's a living document as things can get added to it, as items come up. They will be ranked with this criteria as well. So I have a motion and a second. Can we take a roll?
Real quick. About that we came to an agreement on for waiting. So we have to add that before we would approve this. We have to amend it.
For the waiting side of it?
Yeah, there's just ideas on the list that we got. So we don't actually have what we're agreeing to vote on for waiting.
Oh, so that we can't vote yet because you didn't decide on a weight for each.
Correct. We'd have to just.
Item?
Yeah. Do we want to just have the top one ranked 1 through 10, the second one 1 through 9? So apply higher weight to the top items.
I would my suggestion would just be to weight the top one at a higher 1.25%, and then the rest of them at a 1%.
Okay. Well, and I guess that's actually in there, so then we can just leave it as is. Unless anyone has any other suggestions.
All right, can we take the roll?
Ms. Schultz?
Yes.
Mr. Kurth?
Yes.
Ms. Crosby?
Yes.
Mr. Helmer?
Yes.
Ms. Manley?
Yes.
Ms. Unger?
Yes.
Ms. Wondercheck?
Yes.
All right, the next item 8, our motion passes. Item H is to discuss our action items discussed in closed session.
Thank you. I move to approve the employment services report as presented.
Second.
So I have a motion by Ms. Manley, a second by Ms. Schultz. Any discussion? Diana, can you please call the roll again?
Ms. Manley?
Yes.
Ms. Schultz?
Yes.
Ms. Crosby?
Yes.
Mr. Helmer?
Yes.
Mr. Kurth?
Yes.
Ms. Unger?
Yes.
Ms. Wondercheck?
Yes.
Motion passes. That brings us to future meetings and dates. Board meetings are generally held the second and fourth Mondays beginning at 7 p.m. in the New Berlin West Commons. It is our intention to begin in-person meetings effective our next meeting, which is July 27th. That's our next posted meeting. If we have a meeting before that, we'll make sure that we alert the public and post that as well. So July 27th is a board meeting at 7 p.m. with a finance committee meeting preceding that at 5:30. August 10th is our scheduled budget hearing annual meeting at New Berlin West Performing Arts Center. And August 24th is our board meeting at 7 p.m. with a finance committee meeting preceding at 5:30. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Manley, second by Mr. Kurth to adjourn. Please call the roll.
Ms. Manley,
Yes.
Mr. Kurth,
Yes. Yes.
Ms. Crosby,
Yes.
Mr. Helmer,
Yes.
Ms. Schultz,
Yes.
Ms. Unger,
Yes.
and Ms. Wondercheck.
Yes.
Motion passes. This meeting is adjourned.